Hello, as you can see, I'm back at university, ready to do another book review. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. As you all probably know, this is one of the great classics of not just 19th century literature, but all literature. So it will be an interesting review, although I don't think it's necessarily quite the best book of the 19th century, or even one of the top 10, although it's probably in my top 10, but I've only read about 10, so that's impossible for it not to be. But it's not that overrated. It's a very good book nonetheless. Now, this book is a book I've read already 5 years ago, but the experience was nothing like reading it now. I mean, I've forgotten most of the things that went on anyway, but being 5 years older, I think I can appreciate it a lot more. Other books I've reread, like Great Expectations, had a similar impact both times, but Jane Eyre has got something about it which benefits from being older, which I don't think Great Expectations necessarily had. There's a kind of therapeutic, moral nature which you only appreciate after you've lived a certain amount of time. I haven't done much of my life, but I'm that much older anyway, so it still made a significant impact on how I see the book. Reading this book is quite a therapeutic experience. I mean, a lot of Victorian and 19th century literature has not that many events, quite a slow pace. But I feel like with others, such as Anna Karenina, it's just boring. Whereas Jane Eyre, it's the kind of slow pace isn't necessarily such a bad thing towards enjoyment. It's kind of like taking a shower or drinking a cup of tea. It's quite a cleansing experience after all the over-the-top weird literature of today, like Thomas Pynchon or Angela Carter. I'm not a Christian, but the Christian kind of morals in here do often feel like a respite from the more over-the-top and verbose literature of the 20th and 21st century. As well as the cleansing tone of the novel, though, I'd have to say it was a very well-written piece of literature, especially the first two sections. Jane Eyre's childhood has got kind of visceral power and rage to it, which I don't think the rest of the book has. She's a very angry child, understandably, because she's been treated terribly. But the older she gets, the more kind of composed Christian she becomes. And by the Mr. Rochester section, the pace is slowed down, it's not as visceral, but it's as passionate as Mr. Rochester is, and as much as he represents fire and brimstone and compared with characters like St. John Rivers, the saintly cousin of Jane Eyre, he also kind of represents a break to her from all the torment of her childhood, all the anger. I think he gives her an opportunity to be loved and to love someone and not necessarily hate everything and every figure of authority in her life. As much as I can't quite sympathise with Christian morality, this kind of purely mental love for each other, because they're both described as not very attractive, is something which not necessarily would happen today. Not so much in the 19th century either. I think it's quite a unique story. The final third, or more like quarter of the novel, kind of resolves into frustrating coincidences, even more than someone like Charles Dickens. The 19th century is known for coincidences, but this just kind of brings it to new levels. And this, as well as a kind of relaxation in events, it stops being therapeutic and starts being boring. It kind of makes the third of the novel kind of frustrating, not as good. There's a definite lapse in quality. Things just kind of start happening for no real reason. It's too coincidental to take seriously, especially as this is supposed to be the realist genre. But despite this, I think even the characters in the third section, St. John Rivers and his sisters, and especially Jane Eyre and Mr. Rochester, in fact all the characters in the novel are extremely well characterised. I mean, there is few novels where I feel quite as close to the characters, especially Jane Eyre herself. It's not a coincidence that the Victorian novel is known for being the best at just plain old storytelling, characterisation, themes. There's no modernist or postmodernist nonsense. I mean, I like that kind of stuff, but it does kind of get in the way of good old-fashioned characterisation, which is important for a story, I think. Finally, I'd just like to say how consistently well written it is. It's not flashy or stylised like Vladimir Nabokov or James Joyce, but still I think Charlotte Bronte just writes so well as any Victorian writer. They don't necessarily have their own style quite as much as 20th century writers, but they do get their points across in a really articulate way, which is absent from more recent writing. I think it's kind of seen as quite conservative, which I can definitely see the point. I probably prefer the more stylised stuff, but there is something to say for that. Okay, so my final grade is probably going to be a B, because although it was a very well-written novel, it did have some flaws towards the end, too many coincidences, and it kind of tapered off a bit in interesting themes as well. I'm sorry I've been speaking quietly and that this is so short, but I'm really worried someone's going to hear me, and that would be incredibly embarrassing, so I apologise.